I was looking today at the whole issue of human weakness, and in the book of Hebrews, chapter 5, verse 3, it says this: because he is a man, that's the Jewish high priest, because he is a man, he can deal gently with other men, although they are foolish and ignorant, for he too is surrounded with the same temptations and understands their problems very well. And it talks about Jesus becoming like this high priest. In actual fact, Jesus is really fulfilling the role of the great high priest, the one who's able to identify with our human condition, who's able to stand in our shoes, who really gets the human experience. And yet he is the perfect man who stands there, really able to reconcile us with God, being like the plug that connects us into God that we've always needed, so that the circuit can flow. The sacrifices were a temporary solution to that problem, but not the total solution. They were just pointing forward to a better day when Jesus would be the perfect sacrifice. And that's what the cross is about. That's what his death on the cross is about. Jesus being the perfect solution, the completion of God's plan. Hard to sometimes get our head around all that will mean. And somebody was saying to my wife just recently, don't we understand what is this thing about Jesus and the cross? Why did he have to die? What's that all about? Don't we understand it? And so sometimes these things are quite a challenge to get to the bottom of, but we know that Jesus stood in our place. He had to be there, connecting our human experience with the reality and power of God. And you see, the high priest that was in the temple from the Jewish people, the one who represented them, represented the nation, had to follow all sorts of instructions to fulfill the right sacrifices. And on the Day of Atonement, which is, in the Jewish calendar is sort of normally kind of October time, the most important, holiest day of the year, day of all the nation's sins getting kind of sorted out in one fell blow. But it was a risky business. Put a step wrong and it could all go pear-shaped. And the whole point is Jesus came to fulfill all that, to bring that to completion. Say, like, okay, he's done this once and for all. Not an annual event that has to be repeated every year to try and update as if it was a program that needed updates, like your computer. But this is a once and for all thing. No more upgrades needed. This is the perfect upgrade of all time, eternal. No longer sort of the better version each year, but the whole thing in one go. So in the whole place of eternity, Jesus steps in and says, this is once and for all. And so we find this guy, this high priest, in a position of also vulnerability, of human weakness. We find this necessity that Jesus didn't just kind of do something out from heaven, at a distance, arm's length, but he came and lived amongst us and lived in the real human experience, and the intensity of that, and the intensities that you and I probably will never experience, pains that we might never go through. Maybe you've gone through lots of things, but Jesus really does identify with the most extremes of human experience. Been there, done that, got the t-shirt. And there's something that we always admire about this sort of the turnaround of justice. The redemptive story often comes into lots of our narratives, our stories that we find in life. I was watching something yesterday, and the beautiful sort of Italian version of the Cinderella story. Amazing filming and beautiful sets, scenery, and set in Rome, and lovely old vintage cars. It's quite an idealistic view, but it was very lovely actually, and fantastic costumes. No expense spared on the costumes, and beautiful buildings and so on. So all those kind of things, and yet that was a backdrop for this Cinderella story. The girl who'd been uh, ended up living really as a servant, but in terrible situation, with the stepmother who'd kind of sought to rob her of her inheritance, and uh, uh, and really had been a terrible, corrupt, horrible woman, really, who just wanted to get her hands on finance and property and so on, and the ugly sisters, and the Cinderella figure, gifted, talented, so much in her upbringing from her parents, and yet none of that seemed to be able to be fulfilled, and her opportunity to meet, connect up with the prince and be seen as an equal to him. Of course, he kept seeing her really as a servant, and then of course everything turns around at the end of the story. I won't spoil it, but I think it's quite inevitable what the happy ending is. So all goes well, and that redemptive thread, of uh, the sufferer of injustice becoming the one who's redeemed, and it all goes right. That's such a strong thread in our culture. There's a sense of the the evil woman gets her comeuppance in the story, and and we have a desire for that, because we know that inherent in life must be this sense of justice. Justice must, in the end, get done, and those who seem to be dealt a hand of real injustice feels like they need to be restored, and there needs to be the opportunity for them. And you see, the human condition is really, it is quite significantly about that. It's about how the devil came and sought to destroy the inheritance and purpose of man, and continues to do that, in all sorts of ways. Sometimes blindingly obvious, sometimes much more subtle, but to steal their inheritance, to steal who they should be, to steal the treasure that they ought to have, and it's all about of identity, of who they really are. Not so much the stuff, but it's the actual the identity of who we were called to be. That's what the devil really wants to get his hands on and destroy. And in our humanity, we are subject to that buffering and that pressure the devil wants to destroy. But Jesus wants to restore and bring real freedom. And in this life we may have troubles, we might have challenges, but Jesus shows that actually there's something greater to come, which is the true restoration. It's not a kind of, everything's just going to be fine, and if you do this, this, and this, it'll all be sorted in this life, and it'll be hunky-dory. Those are false promises people often put, aren't they? The self-help industry is full of it, and they're not adequate. They're not able to meet that deepest need. They often don't actually really deal with the human condition, because they say, oh, if you do this, this, and this, you won't be struggling with the human condition. It will be under you. It'll be easy. You won't be affected by it anymore. And that's not a reality most people live with. They live within the constraints of humanity, and Jesus understood that. He lived through that. He was able to identify with that. He didn't try and pretend that it didn't exist and somehow it could be just magicked away, but he actually came and made the real transaction with God, the real transaction of of dealing with sin once and for all, because he had the power to overcome everything that the devil had done, everything the devil had sought to do in people's lives, everything the devil had sought to do in destroying the inheritance, in stealing who we really were, which is the root of the problem. And he had the real understanding of how to deal with the human condition, not just a few superficial band-aid approaches to it, but the real heart, the root of it. And that is the key to being reconciled to God, the key to finding his full and complete forgiveness. God himself came to earth and lived amongst us and really identified with us and understood our situation. Didn't minimize it, didn't gloss over it, didn't give us a few kind of quick hacks and tricks to, just to fool us into thinking that he dealt with issues, but he really dealt with the deepest issues of all. Anyway, so I just pray today that we would understand the reality of how Jesus came, how he came and really identified with our condition. Didn't minimize it, didn't gloss over it, didn't try and pretend anything, but actually dealt with it head on to its fullness. And in doing so, he really understands the full reality of where we are now, and in him where we can go to, what we can become, because we can be restored to be all that God had planned us to be. Come into the fullness of that inheritance, come into the fullness of his glory and beauty that he had always intended for us. I pray that we will come into a fresh understanding of that, even today, that God will speak to our hearts and remind us of his grace and mercy, that Jesus is one who can deal gently with us, even though we're foolish and ignorant sometimes, that he's gone through and experienced those same precious temptations. He understands our problems very well, and in doing so, he's also come and been the solution. He's come and been the perfect sacrifice and paid the full price and stood in our place, reconnected us with God, reconciled us to God, plugged us back in. And if we look to him, he's the one who can bring us into that completeness, into that purpose, into the inheritance, into the identity that God has for us. And we look forward to the day Revelation talks about, Revelation 21 and Revelation 7, where ultimately all the pains of this life also will pass, and when we come into the completeness of everything that he has planned for us, ultimately all the tears will be wiped away, the pain and the heartache will be wiped away, the mourning and the grieving will flee away, that Jesus will wipe every tear, that he's the only one able to do that. He's the only one able to bring that comfort, that ultimate, complete, perfect comfort. And so we look to him as well, even in the things that we might experience in this time, in this life, in our own personal experience, that we look to him as the one who can come into that situation and bring comfort even now. That the psalmist says that he's kept my tears in his bottle. And God knows every day that we've been through. Psalm 139 says that. And even those days where our lives have not been easy, where things that have not made sense, where stuff has happened, that we know that in a broken and destructive world, awful days might have happened in our lives, but God is able to redeem, restore, and he will bring all things to complete restoration and wholeness, because he is able to do that.